each other. So let me welcome everyone. We were waiting on you, Robin, so we can start now. Thank you. We're asking everyone to do a brief introduction of under 30 seconds, just to let Patrick know who's in the room. So I will model that brief introduction. I'm Teresa Elamine. I live in Columbus, Georgia, in the Fannie Lou Hamer branch. I'm the convener of the Ending Mass Incarceration and the Death Penalty. And I first met Patrick in North Carolina when I lived there for 12 years. So we got to do a lot together. I learned what it means to be a Catholic worker. George Friday, please.
Good afternoon, I'm George Friday. I live in Gastonia, North Carolina. Because I'm staff of North Carolina Peace Action, I've gotten to know Pat that way. I'm the organizer of the Southern Piedmont branch of WILF here in North Carolina, along with Samantha Turner. And I will now call on Joan Goddard.
Hello, everybody. My name is Joan Goddard, and I live in Campbell, California, which is in the southern San Francisco Bay area. And our WILF branch is the San Jose branch. Sorry about the phone there. I'm I help to pull the larger group that this subcommittee is part of. The Advancing Human Rights Committee had been on hiatus, and we started up again last summer, and we're got 5 wonderful subcommittees, including this one. Thank you.
Okay, Robin Lloyd and then Diane Blay.
Okay, hi, Robin Lloyd from Burlington, Vermont. We have a branch up here for Northern Vermont WILF, and I'm on the Disarm Committee and looking forward to meeting Patrick and hearing him. Thank you.
Diane Blay and then Deborah Bisak.
Oh, my phone's ringing and people are outside. Can you just, who's Deborah? Could you take over for me? Thanks. I'll be back.
Hi, I'm Debbie Bizak. I've known Patrick for over 30 years, and we work together on the Peace Booth as well as many other different projects.
Good to see you, Deborah. Kim Porter and then Janice.
Hi, I'm Kim Porter, a board member of SARN and a member of the Triad WILF, and saw Patrick last week, and I'm looking forward to hear him speak. I can't stay the whole time because I have a work meeting, but glad to be here. Thanks for having this.
Janice, then Samantha.
Okay. Hi, I'm Janice Hawkins. I live just outside of Des Moines, Iowa, and I'm on the leadership team of Des Moines WILF. And Patrick, we haven't met, and I don't think I've been in prison with you.
Samantha, then
Looking
Donna.
forward to hearing you.
Samantha, Donna, and then Diane will be our last person.
Hi, I'm Samantha Turner. I live in Charlotte, and I work in the Southern Piedmont branch as a co-organizer with George, and work on some other committees as well. I have not had the pleasure of meeting Mr. O'Neill or hearing him yet, so looking forward to it. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Donna Peel from Cape Cod WILF. I'm the convener and on the steering committee. I'm also on the committee getting together voting rights information to hand out this year. I'm very interested and so happy to be able to hear Patrick. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Diane Blay, and I am Secretary of WILF US. Also, I'm the convener for the Jane Addams branch. And yeah, the lawnmower stopped and the phone stopped ringing. Yay. Thank you.
Well, thank you, George. Is that everybody so far?
Yes, it is, except for Patrick.
Well, great. Without any further ado, I've asked Patrick to introduce himself and tell about his prison times, and also about his commitment to ending mass incarceration and the death penalty, and to mention his family, because I still remember them as little children, but they're all grown up for the most part now. So Patrick, you have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I live in Garner, North Carolina, right outside of Raleigh. My wife and I founded the Father Charlie Mulholland Catholic Worker House back in 1991, a house of hospitality and resistance. We have 8 children, Mary and I, and I'm proud to say that all 8 of my children marched with Black Lives Matter. And while they've rejected my authority, as all good children do, they haven't rejected our ethical and moral principles. So I'm glad they're holding on to all of those. So it's nice to be able to have your children march alongside you. I appreciate that. I'm sensitive at the time, and this is a very complex issue. And I'm going to tell the story of Willie Cherry because I think it really typifies the racist tradition. It's a tradition of the death penalty in the South. And Willie Cherry's story was one that I became fascinated with as a journalist. I got to write about. And I always noticed in looking at the list of people executed in North Carolina over my years of writing about the death penalty, that there have been 405 executions at Central Prison, just 6 miles from my house on Western Boulevard in downtown Raleigh, believe it or not. And out of those 405 executions, 299 of them have been of Black men. So Black men, who account for far less than 10% of the state population, account for 74% of all people executed. So essentially what we had in North Carolina was lynching was replaced by state-sanctioned murder, and the executions were just carried out after kangaroo court hearings and trials. And we went from hanging in the public square to the electric chair, to the asphyxiation by gas chamber, and then now this so-called humane way of killing people through lethal injection. 405 deaths carried out in downtown Raleigh. But the story of Willie Cherry is, I noticed that in 1947, oddly enough, in the month of October, just that 1 month, there were 13 executions. And I was sort of really surprised that they could have had that many executions in 1 month. And I also just happened to notice that 5 of those executions were on Halloween for some odd reason. And Willie Cherry was an African-American man from Northampton County, which is right up near the Virginia border. And Willie Cherry's case, it drew my attention because I thought, well, I just drove up to Northampton County and went to the public library. And fortunately, I met 2 African-American women who were operating the library in Northampton County. And they knew about Willie Cherry's case. It had been 70 years prior, 1947 at the time. And they told me there were no newspaper accounts that were kept at the library, but they told me to go a couple of blocks away and meet some guy who kind of ran like a little museum, a county museum. And he had old press clippings from 1947, so I could do some research on Willie Cherry. But what the 2 librarians told me was a startling story I had never heard before, that there was another man arrested in Northampton County in 1947 who ended up having a children's book written about him because of the lynching attempt that failed. It's called The Legend of Buddy Bush. Buddy Bush was, and I'm going to tell you his story too, and I'll try to tell it as fast as possible so I can say a few words about being in prison this past year. I spent most of 2021 either in federal prison, where I self-reported in January of last year, in Ohio, and then in a halfway house for 3 months, and then under house arrest for 6 weeks. And I spent really the last 4 years wearing an ankle monitor as well, for a nonviolent crime. I don't really like to call it a crime, but that's what the government called it. So anyway, Willie Cherry was arrested. Now this is just probably a startling thing. I would tell you, he was arrested for burglary. He and another man broke into the home of a white couple, prominent white couple in a town called Rich Square. They stole $15.11 and a partially filled 3-year-old bottle of brandy. Those items, incidentally, were recovered. At that time, burglary was a capital offense in North Carolina. But imagine this. He's arrested on April 25th. 60 days later, he's convicted after a 2-day trial, sentenced to death by the judge on that day. 100 days later, on October 3rd, he's executed in the death chamber in Raleigh at Central Prison. So in 160 days, he went from arrest to execution. A phenomenal thing. You can't even imagine how there'd be any time at all to uncover any facts in the case, anything that you might want to use for an appeal. I mean, it's just astounding at how unbelievably close to a lynching this was. So here was the story, and I'm going to cut right to Buddy Bush, because while Willie was in jail awaiting trial, Buddy Bush was arrested for attempted rape. And here's how it happened. He was sitting on a sidewalk awaiting a date to go to the movies in Jackson. And at this time in North Carolina, and probably throughout the South, if you were an African-American man on the sidewalk and a white woman approached, you had to step out into the gutter. And so Buddy was sitting in the gutter with his feet in the gutter, and a woman walked past, a white woman, and she didn't notice him and he didn't notice her. But when she got close and saw him there, she screamed and ran off. Within minutes, Buddy was arrested for attempted rape, taken to the local jail in Jackson. I'll read you a little tiny account of what was said about the case. It said, Bush was taken from the Jackson jail by a white mob with the cooperation of the jailer, who agreed to be locked in Bush's cell to make it appear he had been overpowered. Following an investigation, and I'm going to tell you what happened. In the car where they stuffed Buddy Bush in the trunk, he somehow managed to escape and roll out of the trunk onto the ground, onto the road. He escaped and went to the home of his pastor. This is in the middle of the night. And he gets to the home of his pastor, who takes him into his car and drives him across the state line to Virginia. The next day, they contact the governor of North Carolina to explain that Buddy had been taken by a lynch mob and was going to be killed. They were taking him out to a rural area, to some woods to kill him, and he had escaped. The governor fortunately believed the story of Buddy Bush's pastor and said to go ahead and bring him back. And we put him in under safekeeping at the prison in Raleigh, where the executions took place. And fortunately, the governor did an investigation of the case, and it ended up that the jailer who cooperated and 8 other people who were part of the lynch mob were arrested. Of course, all charges were dismissed and nobody was ultimately tried for the attempted lynching and kidnapping of Buddy Bush. But there is a book that you can get called The Legend of Buddy Bush, and it's a children's book, which I'm really glad to hear about what happened to him. So anyway, the sheriff in the Jackson jail, when this happened, he moved Willie Cherry also to Central Prison in Raleigh. And guess what? A lynch mob also showed up to get him. But that lynch mob, of course, was surprised to find out that that also for safekeeping in the 160 days he had to live from the time he was arrested till he was murdered by the state, he was already sent to central prison. So it was very convenient because that was where they killed him. Willie Cherry's case included some bizarre miscarriages of justice. And when he was on trial, the judge at one point cleared the courtroom of all witnesses, including journalists. Cherry testified, he was only 25 years. He testified that he'd been drunk when he committed the crime and had no memory of it. It said that the woman who lived in the house, whose first name was never given, when she was on the stand, she testified that she did smell alcohol on his breath. She was allowed to identify Cherry by the sound of his voice. And it's very complicated, but they actually brought Cherry and her to a house and just had Cherry talking in the next room. And she identified, that's how she identified him. This was just not in a courtroom at all. And the only thing it said that happened to the woman of the house was that she was taken to a hospital where she was suffering from shock and nervousness. And so she testified, and that was it. That was the only evidence against him. But here's the closing. When the judge charged the jury, this is what the judge said. It's absolutely stunning to believe this. And this was an account in the Jackson News. In his charge, Judge Bergwin stated that during the past year, 1947, 36,000 murders and 33,000 rapes and 6 lynchings were listed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the United States. He remarked that none of these crimes were excusable from any standpoint and stated that if as much or more emphasis of publicity had been placed upon the 36,000 murders and 33,000 rapes as were placed upon the 6 lynchings, there would have been less rape and murder. So this was apparently the judge's effort to encourage the jury to find Willie guilty, which they did in 30 minutes time. And that's the story of the 5th execution on Halloween is Willie Cherry. And I think that, that case, because of the lynching attempt in Northampton County might make it somewhat unusual, but we don't know how many lynching attempts were successful and how many people were taken out of county jails and murdered without ever receiving a trial at all. This kind of stuff's not, I haven't been to the museum where there may be some accounts of that, but I was able to meet, fortunately, those 2 librarians in Northampton County who helped me find out this information. And incidentally, anybody who sends me their email, I'll send you that full account, which is about 2,500 words of my research on Willie Cherry and Buddy Bush, so you can read it for yourself. I want to say about incarceration in this country. As an activist, I support abolition of what I call the 3 Ps: prisons, police, and the Pentagon. I don't believe that any of those institutions are redeemable. Over the years, and I've been an activist since the late 70s, I've encountered a lot of my Democratic friends who believe we have to have prisons because that's all we have, but we still need them. Or they might be opposed to nuclear weapons, but they believe the Pentagon does good things in keeping the bad guys under control, and that somehow the police, even though they make mistakes, are necessary. But I've now gotten to a point where I no longer can find any redeeming value to any of those institutions. And a lot of the reason that I feel this way is because of my own personal experience in the 4 federal prison sentences that I've received and the time I've spent in probably 24 jails, mostly in the South. And I'll say that there's nothing redemptive about jail and prison. No one comes out of the experience of going to jail and prison a better person. There's very, very little resources devoted to any kind of rehabilitation. You know, when I was in federal prison during COVID, I was locked in a room with 115 men, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We would get out for recreation maybe for an hour once a week, or maybe 3 times every 2 weeks. 9 men died in the prison I was in, and it was a low security prison. None of them were charged with the death penalty or capital crime. They died of COVID, and almost 100% infection rate among the men I was in prison with. It took 5 months before I got the vaccine in federal prison during the heart of the pandemic. But like when I worked on a landscape crew when I was in prison in Atlanta back in the 80s, where I served a 3-year sentence, I made 11 cents an hour. So it's also slave labor. That's what prison is. So my time is up, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with you. And of course, I have more to share, but maybe some Zoom in the future. But keep in touch by email, and I'd be happy to keep in touch with any of you, or have a phone call if you'd like.
Well, Patrick, you are the main reason we're here. And I would just appreciate it if you would say a little bit more about being a prisoner of conscience, because that's always struck me as something significant, that people like you and Roy Bourgeois and all the people who went to prison intentionally to make a point. So could you say something about being a prisoner of conscience?
Well, I think, you know, it's interesting that incarceration has its roots in the Bible, right? It's a biblical reality for people of conscience, right? And so, and if we look at the history of our own nation, so many of the battles against oppression, racism, injustice involve people who were willing to risk jail and prison to bring about social change, labor unions, voting rights, the Civil Rights Act, the anti-nuclear movement, the anti-US intervention movement. There's just been women's suffrage. I mean, there's a lot of times where people of conscience taking a stand and getting arrested and going to jail or going to prison, conscientious objection during every major war in the history of this country. It's been a very important contribution to social change. And I certainly am not arguing that getting arrested and going to jail is for everybody. It's not something everyone can do, and I recognize that. Debbie Bezak, who's on the call, is one of my co-defendants, and some of you folks who may have been involved in Moral Monday might have went to jail with Reverend Barber, and we're co-defendants as well. But I think there's certainly a place for nonviolent direct action for social change. And I think we've reached the point now where the human experiment is in danger of extinction. You know, you heard of the group Extinction Rebellion. Steve Deere out in Oregon has Planet versus Pentagon. You know, we're looking at both the nuclear arms race and the global climate crisis as threats to the very life of the planet are going on as a human family creation. So maybe the time to resist this government's excesses is now. Keep in mind, President Biden, who's, you know, the great hope after Trump, just signed off on an 800, we didn't sign it yet, but the defense budget went up more than 30 billion since last year, 812 or 13 billion this year. And I'd like to keep in mind that, you know, of the 122 federal prisons there are in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, that's a colossal failure, that institution. Their budget is $8 billion a year. So the war budget in this country is 100 times greater than the complete failure of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And we give 100 times more money to the Pentagon. So imagine what disasters they create with that kind of incredible amount of money that we squander, it is the number one priority of the Earthling to figure out more efficient ways to kill each other. There's no endeavor for which we are committed more than that to our extinction, our own extinction. So yeah, resistance is important. Fortunately, you know, my wife goes to jail too. My children have gotten arrested with me. We do consider it, you know, I always make the joke down at the School of the Americas that the family that gets arrested together stays together. So we do believe that nonviolent direct action has a place. But of course, you know, Teresa knows, Debbie knows, Kim Porter knows, people that I'm friends with know that in order to do these things, you have to have communal support. You have to have people who support you in this process. It doesn't happen alone. My wife and I are in this together. Debbie's supported by her family. In fact, one of her daughters went to jail with us too. So, you know, we appreciate the fact that we have a lot of support to do this. You can't do it in a vacuum.
And we appreciate that you do it. Well, George, I need your help with recognizing people for the Q&A. So George, could you do the Q&A part and recognize people on the stat? Because this little device I'm on is not really good for seeing who's trying to speak. But I think we'll start with your co-defendant, Debbie. When I saw her, I didn't recognize her. So she joined as not a member of WILF, I guess, but maybe she will be. So could Debbie say a little bit more, Debbie, since you're one of Patrick's co-defendants?
Yeah, I've had a few chances to be in handcuffs with them, resisting torture flights out of the Johnston County Airport, the 287G program that was in Alamance County, Moral Monday, and I think there might have been one more in there somewhere.
Death penalty.
Yes, yeah, kneeling out in front of the prison for an execution, hoping to stop that. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing more powerful than actually risking your freedom, and it's a great statement about what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish in stopping these horrible injustices that are happening in so many different ways. It's almost like even overwhelming, like all the injustices in the world, and it's like, where's the one that I'm going to put my body on the line for? And I did not have the good fortune to actually go to jail with Patrick because I keep getting off. I don't know why. They keep letting me go. And yeah, but it's just one of the most moving things. It's seen by so few people. You know, the supporters who come to the courtroom, the people who are there to witness the action, the little tiny bit of press that might get out about it, but it's still, when you witness it, I've witnessed many more acts of civil disobedience that I've been part of, and it's just overwhelming what people can do when they get together, and just the spirit that is a part of those movements. I witnessed a Moral Monday before I actually risked arrest for one, and I was just completely swept away by the power of the people who were there. It's everything, but yeah, so and booth at the North Carolina State Fair in years past, and y'all do wonderful work, and I appreciate that.
Well, Debbie, where do you live? In what city?
I'm sorry, I am now in Wilmington, North Carolina. I used to live in Fuquay Varina, just south of Raleigh, which is where I was when Patrick and I became friends a very long time ago. And his wife Mary, and all our kids grew up together and stuff. But a few years ago, we moved to Wilmington.
Oh,
Debbie,
so you're at the beach.
I don't go there very often because I'm not a beachy person. So it's a strange place to live, but I like downtown.
Debbie did misspeak though, because we actually didn't spend the night in jail together, but we have been to 3 jails together: Wake County, Johnston County, and Alamance County. We've been arrested and been in jail together, but only only until they let us out.
Yeah, I've seen the inside of some holding cells.
Well, George, if you could help with identifying people who join later and also to see who wants to speak, George, I would really appreciate it if you could handle the Q&A and further introductions.
Certainly. Joining
you.
us later and can introduce themselves in this order: Linda Conti, Ashley Carrington, Philip Cole. Your name and your branch, and if you know Patrick. And then anyone who wants to be on stack, raise your hand or type stack in the chat. Linda, Ashley, Philip, please go.
She's on mute.
Linda, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself. You may need extra time. Ashley, if you can go, then Philip, then we'll come back to Linda.
Hi, Ashley Carrington, she, they pronouns. Was I supposed to say something else, George? In the intro?
Where you are.
Oh, and I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina now.
Your branch?
Triangle Branch.
Great, thank you. Philip, if you can go, and then hopefully Linda.
Good morning from California. I am a member of the San Francisco branch of WOOF and enjoying the windstorm here. Thank you very much.
Well, Linda, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm here. I'm in the Westchester, New York branch. We've been around for a while, but it's been a tough COVID time for us. I also have done some volunteer work in some prisons, so this is very important to me.
Thanks, Linda. I don't see anyone typing stack in the chat and no hands are up. Are there any questions for Patrick or Debbie?
Joan is raising her hand.
Wow, how did I miss that?
You didn't.
Samantha?
You didn't. I was waiting for Robin to raise her hand or to put something in the staff because I want to have Robin speak before I do, because my experience with federal prison is only secondhand, not firsthand.
Well, Samantha's hand is up. Robin, did you want to say anything? Well, you're still muted, even though your mouth is moving.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you, Joan. Well, I wanted to support what Deborah was saying about going to prison. I went as part of the School of America's Watch in 2006, crossed the line at Columbus, Georgia, at the base there, and with 30 some other people, a very supportive group. Of course, Ray Bourgeois was watching over us. And so I served for 3 months at Danbury Prison up in Connecticut, and it was quite an education. There were so many young women of color, both Latina and African American, who were kind of at odds. And I think the prison promotes that because the Latinas, some of them didn't speak English well, you know, and of course the African Americans didn't speak Spanish. And it seemed to me that this was such a unique opportunity for real education to go on to teach the African American Spanish and the Latinos to have them meet each other and be able to work together in the future and get jobs in stores and so on. And that wasn't happening. In fact, there was sort of a division there. But when I came out, I saw Orange is the New Black, and I sort of understood my experience from a different perspective.
Oh, thank you, Robin. um, George,
Samantha,
um,
your hand was up. I took it down,
yes.
but Samantha, and then Joan, if you had anything else you needed to say.
I just want to know a little bit more about what planning is involved in doing these civil acts of civil disobedience. So obviously you've been involved in so many, and there had to be a lot of planning involved, but it's not just, when Reverend Barber calls us and says, hey, we're gonna do civil disobedience in DC, and we all show up. Yours were very targeted and very focused. So what did that take? Did you have to keep a small group of people in the know type of thing? It's almost revolutionary, so you can't let too many people in on it without it getting, without it losing the message somehow. So did you keep these actions small?
Well, I didn't say I'm part of the plowshares movement, and that's what Samantha's referring to. It's a movement that started in 1980 by the Berrigan brothers, two Catholic priests who were on the cover of Time magazine in 1971 because they started the draft board raids during the Vietnam War. There's a great movie called Hit and Stay, a documentary film if you ever want to learn about the predecessor movement to the plowshare movement was the draft board raids. But the plowshares movement involves trying to gain access to components or weapons of mass destruction and kind of symbolically disarming them. And yes, it involves a great deal of planning. In fact, I was vested with 6 other people, and the 7 of us were involved in 2 years of prayerful planning. So yes, we had to go and case out sites. It was actually, it was obviously a big deal for 7 older people to gain access to this Navy base in Southeast Georgia and be able to get in there and smash some idols with a hammer. What I actually did was I had a hammer that was made of melted down guns, and they had actually made statues to nuclear weapons there. I thought this is a case of idolatry that's unmatched in anything I can think of. Those golden calves in the Old Testament days didn't really hurt anybody, but these guys are making statues to nuclear weapons. Like, how did people in the Navy even come up with this idea? Let's build statues of weapons of mass destruction. So I took my hammer and I swung it, and bang, it turned out that the statue of the Trident II D5 missile was made of solid cement, and it broke the head off my hammer right away. So it was a formidable idol. Still, the government did not appreciate the symbolic nature of our act and charged us with 3 felonies and a misdemeanor. One of the felonies is one I've received many times. It's called depredation of government property. And to depredate means to plunder, to lay to waste, or to prey upon. So I always like to note at my trials that it's sort of odd that I've been charged with depredating the ultimate depredator. But anyway, yes, in answer to your question, Samantha, it's quite a bit of preparation, and it's quite scary to go onto a submarine base in the middle of the night on the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination, carrying a banner with King's picture on it. To do this action, I guess, it's certainly not like going off to war, nothing like that. But it does involve some risk, that's for sure. And of course, you do the time. But I like to keep things in perspective. Phil Berrigan, who was one of my mentors, who died 20 years ago this year. I remember one time when I was in jail in Orlando, Florida, awaiting trial for my first plowshare action, which was on Easter Sunday in 1984. A reporter from the Orlando Sentinel went to interview him at his home at Jonah House in Baltimore, and the reporter asked Phil how much of his marriage to Elizabeth McAllister, who incidentally was my co-defendant in this action I just did, how much of your marriage have you spent separated by one or the other being in jail or prison? And he said about half their marriage at that time. And he said, the quote that I memorized that he gave to the newspaper reporter, which I think really keeps things in perspective. He said, "We don't want to appear heroic. the sacrifices which people make for war every day are far more grievous than what we have done. So I like to keep my own going to prison in perspective. I wasn't asked to kill anybody. I didn't, risk being killed necessarily, although that's subject to debate. But the point is that if Joe Biden decides to send troops to Ukraine tomorrow, I don't even know that that's that far-fetched of a thing. He would have tens of thousands of teenagers basically raising their hands saying, take me, I'll die for whatever you tell me to die for. I'll kill for whatever you try, So we have a system in place where, of thousands of teenagers are willing to give their lives for their country and not even knowing what it's about or who the enemy is. I mean, it's a shameful, horrible thing, right? And I don't even know what to say. I mean, the amount of deaths and suffering, approximately during the Vietnam War, we killed 3 million Vietnamese, 3 million. I mean, that's really genocide, isn't it? 3 million, it's unbelievable, the consequences of war.
Well,
We've been
Patrick,
joined by a couple of new people. Katie Cardenas, and Robin has a guest with her. Katie, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and after that, Robin, if your guest wants to introduce himself, please do.
Hi, how are you? My name is Katie Cardenas, and can you hear me?
yes.
Okay. Sorry. And I live in Garner, and I've met Patrick through the many things that he does in our area, and I'm just really excited to see him continuing to do so much for these important issues, as well as so many other things he does on the local level too. So thank you for letting me join.
Well, speaking of joining, you're in Garner, which is in the Triangle Branch area of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And I've been kind of nudging Patrick and Mary. So we're looking to sign up new members of WILF in the Triangle. So please think about that. But
Okay.
also, George, if I could, I'm sorry, if Robin could introduce her friend that she brought to the meeting.
Okay, this is my friend Eric Agnero. He's here for the next meeting at 3 o'clock, which is Toward Freedom, our media organization. And you can tell.
Yeah, I'm also, so I'm originally from the Ivory Coast, so I can definitely relate to what, the superpowers are doing in Africa. Especially in Africa, we have a say, just quickly, when two elephants fight, it's the grass underneath that suffers, and then we've been like these grass that have been suffering from, these elephants that are fighting. And even the war in Ukraine has consequences over there, because the countries that are not following the US in this insane, operation proxy war in Ukraine will be beaten by the IMF or the World Bank. So my name again is Eric, a good friend of Will. I'm, begging to get in.
And be on the board.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, don't make him beg too hard, Robin. We're glad to get new members.
He's pretty qualified, I'd say.
Absolutely. Well, I just like everyone to know that Patrick has agreed to be on the panel at the second annual Fannie Lou Hamer Human Rights Conference. And the opening panel is to be about the TPNW. And the idea is to get members of the Congressional Black Caucus, Patrick, to hear from you about why we never want to use a nuclear weapon and why the US should be a part of the treaty prohibiting that. And so Patrick has agreed to honor us with his presence to tell about the Plowshares movement and his recent time in federal prison, because the thought that we would use that anyone would use a nuclear weapon, and to have that come out of the mouths of people during the Ukraine struggle has been pretty scary. And Patrick, it's such an honor to have you here. And we have a hard stop at 3. So I just want to make sure if anyone here on the Ending Mass Incarceration and the Death Penalty Subcommittee has anything that's happened since our last meeting around the issue of ending mass incarceration and the death penalty. And I'll go when a couple of other people have it, because we're really doing a lot in Georgia. So anyone would like to speak on what you've been doing since the last meeting?
Would you forgive me for asking a question?
Is that Linda?
Yes, it is. Yes. Is the video going to be available? I wish some other members were able to see it. Will it be available online?
Yes, George will post the link to the branches list.
Thank you.
And Ellen seems very good, Ellen Thomas, at taking the videos and putting them on the Wilf YouTube channel. So
wonderful.
You will be able to do that because to have Patrick here with us is a pretty special event. So I'm sure Ellen Thomas will probably put it on the Wilf YouTube channel.
Thank you.
But let me just say quickly about what we're doing in Georgia. In January of 2023, the Ebenezer Baptist Church is going to host a national conference on ending mass incarceration. It's the second one that Reverend Warnock, before he was senator, did the first one in 2019. And I attended that. I was the only person from Columbus who attended that conference. And we're going to make sure that's not the case in January of 2023. So we're working with the executive pastor at Ebenezer to build a contingent from Columbus to that conference in January at Ebenezer. And we're going to have a conference here in Columbus in the next few weeks that's organized by the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance. And I'm working with the 2 pastor leaders in that. And we're working on expungement as a major part of the work that we're doing here. How do we get the records expunged for so many of the people here who have felonies? So that's the work that we're doing in the Fannie Lou Hamer branch here in Columbus, Georgia. Is there anything anyone else would like to speak about before we choose the next meeting date? Patrick, do you know Seth Koch, Jonathan Koch's son? I can't hear you, Patrick, you're muted.
I don't think I do.
Well, Seth Koch has a book out called Lethal State, and it's kind of the history of the death penalty in North Carolina. Jonathan Koch used to be the head of public health at UNC at Chapel Hill. And he sent me this book telling me about his son, and I've just started to read it. And lots of the things that you were talking about are in the book about the lynchings and stuff. So if you get a chance, Seth Koch.
Yeah, I wrote it down.
Oh, okay, good. Because he may be our speaker on May 9th at our next meeting. So these meetings are open to all Wilf members. And we obviously are willing to have other guests, but the next meeting is proposed for May 9th. which is the second Monday in May. And we're trying to stick to kind of the second Monday at 2 p.m. So I need to hear from everyone who comes to the Ending Mass Incarceration and the Death Penalty meetings. I need to hear from you if May 9th at 2 p.m. will work okay. Are there any objections to May 9th at 2 p.m.? George, can you see?
I don't see any objections. There's nothing in the chat.
Well, great. Well, our next meeting will be May 9th at 2 p.m. Now, are there any final words from anyone? It's 2:55, and so we want to give Patrick anything he would like to say to us, like he's going to be joining Will today or something like that.
You can count me and Mary in.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
We're happy to be part of Will.
You'll be with all your friends in the Triangle, Lucy Lewis and all the people there. They're still there in the branch in the Triangle. So Garner,
they had me on a radio show last year over there.
Oh, wonderful.
I did want to say, my advice would be that we have to take the words reform out of our vocabulary. And let's stop talking about reforming the police and reforming the Pentagon and reforming prisons. And let's start really talking about abolition, which is our only hope. We can't save the earth from violence unless we get rid of the perpetrators of violence. And it's not a few bad apples in the police department. It's not just prisons that need to be modernized or need more workers or better trained workers. That's not the issue here. And the Pentagon is the most violent institution, which Martin Luther King 55 years ago said it best. The number one purveyor of violence in the world today, which continues to be true, is my own country. So it's time for abolition. And believe me, these nuclear weapons are not props. Deterrence is a lie. They're meant to be used and they will be used. It's only a matter of time. Mutually assured destruction can't last in perpetuity. It's insane.
It is. Oh, Patrick, we love you so much and thank you. Everybody wave your hands and say hi. And we love Patrick. Thank you. The recording is saved. George is saved, the recording and the chat. So thank you, George. Love you. See you later.
It was wonderful to be with everyone.